look, everybody, thank you very much for your time. I'm Tom Abraham James, the President and CEO of Pulsar Helium. I guess you could say after the previous presentations that we've had, now it's time for something completely different. So as the name suggests, we're all about helium. And this slide here is quite a good one to start with. So what we have in the photograph is a picture of the Jetstream #1 well that we drilled at our Topaz project in Minnesota in February. And what you see coming out of the well here is not water, but is indeed helium-rich gas. So we had a very successful drill program earlier this year. Important legal information, and then getting into it. So an overview on the company. So multi-project. So what we do as a company is we look for helium in the ground. So we look for occurrences of helium that could then contribute to global supply. So we're the first mover in 2 different jurisdictions. The flagship project is the Topaz project in Minnesota in the USA. And that one where I just mentioned earlier that we drilled it in February, and we were getting helium concentrations of up to 14.5%. Now, what does that mean? If we talk about natural gas or oil, we don't typically talk about concentrations or grade, but with helium we do. It's a bit like mineral exploration in that regard, that the higher concentration, indeed, the better it is. And so for helium, anything which has got a helium concentration in the raw gas of being 0.3% or higher is deemed to be potentially economic. So having up to 14.5% is truly world-class, and we're certainly very happy to have it. Accompanying the helium is CO2, and I'll elaborate more on that a bit later, but CO2, there's been a shortage that's ongoing in the USA for CO2 for food, beverage, and water treatment. Our second project is in Greenland, and is the Tunu project, one of very few primary helium occurrences in Europe. You'll hear me use this term primary as well a few times. What that means is where helium is the primary economic driver in the gas. So typically helium is a byproduct of natural gas production. What we do is we look for reservoirs where helium is the major economic driver, not associated with hydrocarbon production. Helium is certainly used very much with a tech bias to its applications. And that has been impacted by an ongoing shortage of helium, which has really persisted globally for about 10 years now. And as for the team, you could say that we're highly incentivized. We own about 37% of the issued capital of the company. So we're a listed company. We're listed on the AIM exchange in the UK. So we listed there just the other week. We are also listed in Canada on the TSXV. And our shares are traded in the USA on the OTCQB, the over-the-counter market. So this information here, the corporate snapshot, is from a few days ago, so from the 14th of November. I think some of the key takeaways here is that so the market capitalization is about £33 million. We've got, 3.7 million pounds in cash. And then with the warrants that we have on issue, probably worth mentioning that the lion's share of those, so roughly 3/4 of those, are under escrow for the next 12 months. So that was one of the conditions of us listing on the AIM exchange. And then in terms of the shareholders, so our major shareholder, AB Crescent, is a Dutch group of financial investors. And then we have our chairman, Neil Herbert, and myself here, and then other founding shareholders. So it's very tightly held. So about 49% is the public shareholding afloat, and 37% of issued share capital is subject to escrow until February 2027. So indeed a tightly held stock. And for myself and my colleagues, we're certainly agreed to that lengthy lockup period, because we are certainly believers in the potential of this company moving forward. And what we've got here is we've got the TSXV 3-month chart. Apologies for switching currencies here, but we only just listed in the UK. And you can see that the share price is hovering around that sort of 50 to 70 cent mark. The board of directors, so myself, co-founder of the company. My background is I'm a geologist. I've worked in the helium exploration industry now for a decade. So really, since it began, it is quite a new industry. New because of the requirement now for helium for technical applications, but also because of the ongoing shortage. So for the first time, companies like Pulsar are going out there looking for primary occurrences of helium. So I've been in that industry now for a decade, alongside our chairman, Neil Herbert, who's co-founded the company with me, and also with our technical manager, Josh Blewett. So Neil's been involved in the helium industry for almost a decade as well as other, I guess you could say, more of the bespoke commodities. John Ferrier, as you have mentioned, so he's the former CEO of Gulf Keystone Petroleum, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange. And so that is for oil production out of Iraq. And John brings with him that operational experience and production experience. And then Brice Loren down the bottom represents our major shareholder, AB Capital. So the roadmap to success. So exploring for helium is akin to other commodities out there. So identification of an area of interest, leasing the area of interest, data acquisition, so typically geophysics, geochemistry, and so on. That's the stage that our project in Greenland is at. So we've identified that there is primary helium there with the surveys that are being conducted to date. The next stage after that is delineating a resource and then drilling as well. So this is where we're at with Topaz in Minnesota. So we've drilled there, we have a resource. The next step are to then go from resource to reserves, so effectively something which is then bankable. Then we would look to secure offtake agreements with end users of helium, and then go into production. So at this present moment in time, we're still in the exploration phase, but certainly with Topaz, we're off to a very good start. Why helium? Well, as the title says, it's not just about party balloons. So I always like to start by saying that party balloons accounts for about 5% of market share. The rest of it is all very much geared towards the tech industry. The major application for helium is in the fabrication of semiconductors, so computer chips. We're seeing that certainly with the AI advancements and the requirement for additional new computer chips, semiconductors, that is a major consumer of helium. The traditional long-term application for helium has been MRI scanners. So in order for the magnet to superconduct, you need to have liquid helium. Modular helium reactors, so with reactors for energy production. Space launch is a big one. So as the space rocket consumes its fuel, helium is used to maintain pressure in the fuel tanks. Fiber optic cable manufacturing, computer hard drives to reduce the energy consumption of cloud computing, amongst others. The time is now. So really, this is supply demand. It's quite busy, this slide, but the key takeaways are that the demand for helium is set to increase. And really, that is due to the numerous new applications in the tech industry for helium. But supply has been constrained. And the biggest reasons for that is that, well, the USA, which has been historically the largest producer of helium, aging gas fields. So the production of helium is less than it once was. In addition to that, the USA had the Federal Helium Reserve, which is a strategic reservoir of pure helium that brought stability to the global helium market. So say if the helium plant went down, production was off, then there was always the reserve to be there as a backup. That has now dwindled in size, and also it's just recently been privatized. So what we see with these fundamentals is an increase in the price of helium, and it's gone up quite steadily. So we're seeing that the price of helium is now roughly in excess of 150 times that of natural gas. There are two different helium products, both of them in pure form, but one is gas and one is liquid, and it's liquid helium that fetches the premier price. So zooming in now on our project. So this is the Topaz project in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, where we drilled the well that was on the title slide in February of 2024 of this year. So we are located in northern Minnesota, not too far from the Canadian border, and we're just to the east of North America's major iron ore mines. So it's an area with a rich history of resources, and where we are the first mover for helium. So there's been some occurrences of non-flammable gas, of which 2 were analyzed for helium. So where our project is, and then some 160 kilometers to the south, there's an occurrence there with 2% helium. This has given us confidence that this is something regional that we're looking at, that this is not an isolated occurrence. The USA is also the largest consumer of helium, so being in the USA is very important. And as one would expect for the USA, logistics is very good. So right nearby to a major highway, considering that helium is sent out and transported on trucks, not pipelines, then that's important. And the only consumable for the production of helium is electricity, and we are close by to grid power as well. This is what it looks like. So this is February of this year. So the rig is a truck-mounted rig that came in and, as I say, successfully flowed helium to surface, not associated with water, and we were getting up to 14.5% helium. So here's some of the technical fundamentals. So we drilled down to 671 meters depth. And really what we did is we replicated the original discovery. So we were made aware a few years ago of a helium discovery in this location. The company was actually out there drilling for nickel, and whilst doing so, they unexpectedly encountered gas. They were very concerned that gas was combustible, so they took numerous samples, sent them off to multiple laboratories, came back saying it's non-flammable, but had a very high helium concentration. So that was really our impetus to get involved, and really that's what started Pulsar. So we then we recorded a maximum flow rate of 821,000 cubic feet a day. Bottom hole pressure there, 161 psi, and then the lab results confirmed helium between that 7.9 and 14.5%. Now, up to that 14.5%, that really does rank it amongst the highest drilled in North America for helium. That data was then given to Sproul, who's a US-based engineering firm, to go and conduct the resource estimation. And we're very pleased with this comment that they mentioned, which is that with only one well drilled in the project so far, that it came back with a fairly high chance of commerciality of 65%. So off to a tremendous start with only one well having been drilled to date. So what we now do is we build on the success of that Jetstream #1 well. And this image here, green is good. So to break it down, so what we're looking at here is a cross-section of the subsurface. And this data that we're looking at is effectively seismic data. So collected using ambient noise tomography or passive seismic. And what that means is red is where the seismic waves, they travel at high velocity, they travel quickly. And in the green is where they start to slow down. And what we found is that the green correlates with where we're encountering the gas. So this drill trace here in the red, we can see that at the base of it is where we just intersected the gas. That's where the gas flowed to surface, and we're going up to 14.5% helium. And so as we can see, is that there is still a considerable amount of interpreted reservoir in the green that we are yet to penetrate. And so we have a drill rig booked, we have the permits in place, the site has been prepped, and the drill rig will be arriving early December, and we'll be then coupling up to this hole and then pushing it down through the entire height of the reservoir. So that is roughly an additional 500 meters drill depth. The gas is held in fractures in the rock, and so with this seismic data, seeing the slowdown in the velocity waves makes sense. It correlates well with the fractures, the gas filled. We also have additional data in the form of gravity data as well, and conventional two-dimensional seismic, which all correlate very well with one another and suggest that certainly this reservoir does extend deeper. We then have the proposed step-out well also, and that one is likely to be, so this is more for illustrative purposes, but something that we've been looking to drill in the vicinity, and is something that is proposed to occur after we deepen the jet stream well. And really, in terms of drilling, it should only take about 10 days to complete that well, so we should have the results of that with any luck before Christmas. So we've got a development plan here, and so as I say, this is based on, really at the moment we've drilled one well, but that one well has been extremely successful, and so we go off and we deepen the well in December, appraise the full height of the reservoir. It's then proposed that we go and we drill the step out well, and that would also that's intended to drill through the entire height of the reservoir as well. Then a preliminary economic assessment. So at this stage, we have not talked publicly about the economics of the project. So what we want to do is complete this next phase of drilling, and then early in the next year, we would then be doing an update to our resource, and then looking at the economics of the project as well. In the meantime, it's all about increasing our footprint as well. So we believe that this is quite regional in its size, the helium region. So we're always looking out for additional lease areas. And also it's worth noting that the state of Minnesota in May of this year passed new legislation for the exploration and production of helium, hydrogen, and then also included is CO2 sequestration as well. So that legislation is then giving the ability to lease state land. At the moment, all of our project area is on privately held mineral rights. So the resource that was conducted by Sproul, so we come out here with a P50, which means it's a probabilistic measurement, so 50% chance or greater that the recoverable helium is 0.4 billion cubic feet. And then also we talk about the CO2 as well, and that's come up at 2.9 billion cubic feet. So good large numbers, once again, considering only the one well. So what we have coming up is that we have the drilling and then ongoing seismic acquisition as well. So that will be commencing as of next month. The resource estimation in Q1 of next year, the update, and then the economics soon thereafter. And this really builds on the work that we've conducted to date, which is we've been doing some quite significant data acquisition, geophysics since 2021 in the lead up to drilling earlier this year. That was important because getting into the project and seeing that it had been drilled, that it had been successfully flowing helium to surface, but I guess you could say it was a bit cart before the horse. Typically, you go off and you gather all the subsurface data, and then you test the theory by then going and drilling it. Whereas this one has been shown to be a productive helium reservoir, but without that build-up data. So hence why that section I showed you earlier with the seismic data is very important, coupled with the other geophysics. That really gives us faith that this is not an isolated occurrence, and is in fact something that we believe is quite sizable. The new legislation just occurred in May of this year. We've drilled the appraisal well in February, and we're going to deepen that one next month. And then the resource estimation that we had based on the initial well was completed in August of this year. So since listing only in August of last year, the company has been very busy. I want to touch briefly on CO2. This is something that we're not all familiar with. In fact, we talk about what do we do with the excess CO2 that we have, but that's very different to CO2 that we can use, particularly in something that is consumable. So for us, with our well, we have something which is a pure CO2, so CO2 from emissions that has all sorts of nasties that we don't particularly want to put in our bodies, ash, sulfuric acid, and so forth. Whereas a pure CO2 Actually, there has been a shortage in the USA now for a few years, and this is mostly on the back of decreased production from one of the major CO2 production sites, a place called Jackson Dome in Mississippi. So what we're seeing is the requirement for new CO2 sources to come online, and the price has gone up quite significantly. So we're seeing prices of around $30 per 1,000 cubic feet. Keeping in mind that natural gas is anywhere between $2.50 and $5. So it is a valuable product, and it could be a very substantial byproduct for any potential production scenarios. So its major uses are to carbonate drinks, something we're all familiar with, for medical applications, potable water treatment to reduce the acidity of water that we consume, and then for food preservation, transportation of food, and so on. So numerous applications. And where our project is in Minnesota, it's quite displaced from CO2 production, and it appears that there is a ready market for this product. Very briefly on Greenland. So we have the first license in Greenland for helium and hydrogen exploration. So it certainly does have some geological hallmarks that do make it favorable for hydrogen accumulations that we're assessing. East coast of Greenland, with it was something that was, I guess, new to the government, and it was something that was debated in Parliament, and we did obtain the first license that includes helium and hydrogen in Greenland's history. So it's quite close to the European market, so it is something that any potential production from there would be geared towards the European Union, whereas our Topaz project would certainly be staying in the USA. It's a very large license position, 2,816 square kilometers. And what we've done is we've identified there that there is helium present. And now the next step is what we did this year, in fact, is that we collected seismic data so we can start to image up the subsurface and see what the reservoir looks like and the characteristics of that. And we're currently awaiting the feedback from that survey. We're waiting for the interpretation of the data that we only just collected. So look, this is a summary slide. In summary, so an emerging helium project developer, certainly with our project in Topaz, a tremendous start there, world-class grades, and we are going to be working as hard we can to realize its potential as quickly as possible. And that starts in only a matter of weeks when the drill rig gets back on site in the beginning of December. We've got a defined development strategy, so really our intention is to go out there and to realize its potential for production. That is our motivation, and everything we do is working towards that. It's a very valuable commodity. We see that demand for helium will only grow, and it's also if we, if new helium sources come online, we see that such as ours potentially, then it will be a good thing, because supply has been constrained for such a long time now, for a decade now, that a number of fabricators out there, factories and so on, have been not using helium because they are concerned whether they would be able to get it, and so therefore their production lines is a very high risk. So we see that increased helium production would certainly be well met by industry, so they can switch, and therefore demand would only increase with more available helium. Strong news flow coming up. So as mentioned, we do have quite a lot happening with the drill rig, with resource update, and then economic assessment. And the team, we've been in this industry now for a decade, with some other people in the oil and gas industry, with their knowledge being directly applicable to what we do. So we certainly, I'm very confident that the team we have is a team that can bring this project forward and realize their potential. So that ends the formal part of the presentation, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
So a few questioners asking about the recent fundraise and the runway that gives you. So does it give you the funding you need to finance the exploration you need, and at the scale that you would like? And then kind of further to that, the question about the step out well. Do you have sufficient cash for that step out well?
Okay, so what we have is, yes, so with the listing in the UK, we had a fundraise with that one. So that was very successful. We are funded for the drill rig coming out and doing the deepening of the jet stream well. So that one's all in place. And then for sufficient runway for working capital and to do the resource updates and the economic analysis. And then with the step out well, that is something that we will be looking at the possibility of doing. So that one is not locked in at this stage, but certainly based on the results of the deepening of the well, and then with some of the, so we are looking at some of the options of that with the funding for the additional step out well. So there is the opportunity of some warrants that we have out there as well. So we are looking at all options, and certainly having the rig out there, we would like to keep it out there and to be able to drill that step out well also.
A couple of questions about the depth of the Jetstream 1. It may have been because what they were looking for at the time, but why wasn't it drilled deeper initially?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was quite a conservative approach from us. So we wanted to go out and when they drilled that original well, they didn't have any of the gas testing equipment. It wasn't a gas rig, and so we wanted to go out and replicate it and make sure it was bona fide, which it was. We did push it through a little bit deeper than the original one. And then the intention was to go a little bit deeper again. But what we found was that last winter in Minnesota, so for any listeners who are in northern USA, last winter was a slightly abnormal winter. It was a lot more mild than most are accustomed to. So actually what happened was the snow melt came a bit sooner than anticipated. And so that meant that with one of the access roads, it was going to become restricted for heavy equipment to anything over 1 ton. So we were given a fairly firm date that we had to get out, otherwise the drilling equipment would get stuck. But to be honest, with hindsight, even if we were able to go and push it deeper, it's nice that we've had the opportunity to confirm the results of the well. We've collected in the meantime additional geophysical data around there, which gives further certainty about what depth we do need to get to. And so now we're very confident with this deepening program that we're doing, that it will go through the entire section of the reservoir.
Thank you. Next question. It's been noted that you've explored only about 13% of your gross land position. What does that mean for potential increase in gross recoverable gas reserves? And another question about Jetstream 1. How likely is it that deepening Jetstream 1 will lead to increased flow rates and high concentration?
Okay, so with the license area, yes, indeed, like the 13% really comes from where we've been, the area where we've drilled, and then where we've conducted the seismic surveys. Outside of that, we've conducted a regional gravity survey and high resolution. That's a very helpful tool for at a sort of macro stage to be able to identify areas of interest. So that 13% where we've been working at this stage is effectively looking at one prospect. With the data that we have, we've found that there are certainly other areas of interest. They've been identified by the gravity data, and we need to then go out, and that's why I say next month, with acquiring the additional seismic data, it's going off to these other locations to then be able to firm up the imaging there of the additional prospects, the other reservoirs, to then get them to a point where they're drill ready. So that's certainly our intention, and going off and doing that. And with the second question, the deepening of the well, yes, look, going greater depth. The well we drilled was quite shallow, so 670 meters. So extending it by another 500 or so meters to go over a kilometer's depth, one would anticipate that would have a beneficial sort of effect on pressure and therefore flow rates. So it is anticipated.
I had a question, one from me. We over the years had many presentations from different resources companies. You kind of get familiar with different grades. Now, helium, new to me, I'm sure new to many of our listeners. When you talk about 14% or 14.5% grade, how unusual is that? Is that kind of equivalent to bonanza for gold? What's the relative grade that means? How significant is that?
We see that with some of the other North American projects, ones that have gone into production, concentrations anywhere between 0.5% and 2%, 2% being on the upper side. There are some other ones where they've got sort of like a 6 to 8%, aware of those as well. But in North America, we're not aware of any other double-digit helium concentration. So for us, I think it certainly does stand out. And what's, I guess, doubly pleasing is that it's in Minnesota where there's no history. So a lot of these older ones of occurrences have been very well mapped and drilled and known. But for a brand new discovery to be in that double-digit territory is, yeah, it's very exciting.
A couple more questions. Can you drill over winter? Are the conditions there normally okay for you to keep in the field?
Yeah, winter time's great. So we don't use water with the drilling, so we don't have to worry about anything freezing. In fact, if anything, it's nice and stable. So whilst it may be physically uncomfortable for the people there, from a drilling point of view, it's actually really quite desirable. So it's very good. The only time that drilling becomes difficult is, as I was mentioning earlier, is when you get the snow melt. So there's about a 4-week period there where they put load restrictions on the road because they don't want them damaged when all the snow is melting. But otherwise, middle of winter is it's actually an ideal time to drill.
And the final one then, it's about valuations and kind of peer group companies. Again, from someone more familiar with the London markets, we're looking for a kind of a peer group or to try and extrapolate relative valuations. Are there other listed UK helium businesses? If there are, apologies.
Yes, there's a couple of others. Yes.
Okay, and so is there then, if you're trying to compare like for like, you can see a market there?
Yeah, look, I think that one of the reasons that we chose to go into the UK is that it has matured a bit more for industrial gas companies. There were a few more players that weren't there a few years ago. So look, I think that there's room for multiple helium companies because of this shortage, but in terms of valuation, I mean, it's not really for me to say, but what I can say is that with our project being in the USA, it's in the right place. It appears to be the highest concentration helium. We have a byproduct as well that is certainly saleable, which is CO2. And we've got a very supportive government with the new legislation that's come out. So I would like to think that we're quite well placed amongst our peers.
Lovely, Tom, that's been terrific, really interesting. Thank you very much, really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.